This happened about 4 years ago, when I was 22. I just moved into my first real apartment. Not a dorm, not my parents' place, mine. I was in that phase where being alone felt like freedom, like something I'd earned. I remember feeling genuinely proud of that little space. The lease, the keys, the quiet, all of it felt like progress. I don't sleep well anymore. Haven't since that night. I've never really talked about why. The apartment was on the third floor of a building in East Nashville, Tennessee, one of those older converted brick buildings on Greenwood Avenue. 3 stories, narrow hallways, original hardwood floors that groaned if you breathed on them wrong. Character, the listing had called it. I called it charm. I know better now. It was a Tuesday in late October, around 9:40 in the evening. The kind of night that drops cold fast. One of those first real cold snaps of fall where you can feel it under the door before you even open it. I had the heat on low. The radiator in the corner had been doing that clicking thing it always did when it first kicked on. My roommate was out of town, visiting family in Memphis for the week, so it was just me. I was sitting on the couch with my laptop, halfway through a paper I had due Thursday, half watching something on my second monitor. The building was quiet. It usually was on weeknights. The couple upstairs had a dog that sometimes moved around after 10, and the guy in 3B had a habit of microwaving things at odd hours. You could hear the beep through the wall, but that night, nothing. The hallway outside was silent. The street below had gone quiet. I wasn't scared. I had no reason to be. I was home. It was somewhere around 10 when I first heard it. A sound from inside the coat closet, the one right beside the front door. Not a bang, not a crash, just a slow, soft knock. One knock, then nothing. I looked up from my laptop. I sat there for a second, waiting for a second knock. It didn't come. I told myself it was the building settling. Old brick buildings do that. They expand and contract with temperature changes, especially on the first cold nights of the year. The radiator was cycling. The walls were adjusting. That was all. I went back to my paper. Except, and this is the part one kept coming back to later, the sound hadn't come from the wall. It had come from inside the closet, from behind the door, not through it. There's a difference. A wall settling sounds like it's part of the structure moving. The sound like something shifting its weight. I told myself I'd left a box stacked wrong in there, that it had finally slid. One box, one knock, done. I almost believed it. I didn't get up to check. I think about that a lot. About 20 minutes later, my phone lost signal. That was strange on its own. I had good coverage in that apartment. Always had. But I looked down and it was just searching, that little spinning indicator, sitting where the bar should be. I figured a cell tower was down somewhere. Turned on the Wi-Fi calling. Went back to work. Then the dog upstairs stopped moving. That sounds like a small thing. But that dog, I'd lived beneath it for 8 months. I knew its patterns. It paced at night. Nails on hardwood back and forth. Sometimes for an hour. Consistent. Predictable. It was one of those background sounds I'd stopped consciously hearing. It stopped. Mid-pace from the sound of it. Just stopped. The silence that followed was the wrong kind of silence. Not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like something is holding its breath. I noticed that the way you notice when a fan you forgot was running suddenly shuts off. That absence landing heavier than the sound ever did. I closed my laptop. I sat in that silence for what felt like 2 full minutes. Listening. The radiator had stopped clicking. The street outside had gone completely still. Even the wind, which had been running under the front door all evening, had quit. And then, from the hallway outside my apartment, not my closet this time, the hallway, I heard footsteps, slow ones, deliberate, moving toward my door. I lived at the end of the hall. There was nothing past my unit except a utility closet and a fire exit that set off an alarm if you opened it. No one had any reason to walk to that end of the hall unless they were coming to my door. The footsteps stopped directly outside. No knock, no sound, just stopped right there. I stared at my door for a long time. The deadbolt was turned. I could see it from the couch. I kept looking at it like it was going to move. It didn't. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Whatever was on the other side of that door just stood there in the dark hallway and did not knock and did not leave, and I could not explain it, and I stopped trying. The closet door opened. Not all the way. Just moved. Drifted. An inch, maybe two. Then the light above me went out. Not a flicker. Not a buzz. Just gone. I was on my feet before I knew I was standing. Something hit the floor behind me. I didn't look. I couldn't tell if I'd knocked it or if something else had. The room was dark, and the dark was wrong. And there was a sound I still can't name. Low. Close. Like something dragging its weight across the floor near the hallway. I didn't think. I didn't plan. My keys were in my hand. I don't remember grabbing them. I hit the deadbolt. Pulled the door. The hallway light was out too. I ran. Down the hall. Hit the stairwell door with my shoulder. Stairs. 3 flights felt like 10. Out through the lobby door and onto the sidewalk. And I just kept moving until I was standing in the parking lot under the streetlights with the cold air hitting me and my chest tearing itself open trying to breathe. I stood there, hands shaking, just stood there in the yellow light. I did not go back inside. Not that night. My roommate came home 2 days later. Nothing in the apartment was disturbed. The closet was closed. The lights worked. The building manager checked the hallway camera from that night and told me it had been recording static, malfunction. He said, probably the cold affecting the hardware. I moved out 3 months later. I told people it was a noise issue. I've never lived in an apartment above the first floor since then. I'm aware that's not rational. I can't seem to care. Whatever was in that hallway outside my door, it didn't knock. That's the part that stays with me. It knew I was in there. It just didn't feel the need to ask. This was about 3 years ago, when I was 25. I'd just come out of a bad breakup. The kind that doesn't end clean. The kind where you're still finding the other person's things in your drawers 6 months later. I was staying at my parents' house while they were on a 2-week trip through the Pacific Northwest. Just me, the house I grew up in, and what I thought was going to be 2 quiet weeks of getting my head together. I still check the locks twice before bed now. Sometimes 3 times. My therapist says it's a habit. I don't correct her. My parent house is in Naperville, Illinois, one of those older neighborhoods off Route 59 where the houses are big and the lots back up against a tree line. 2 stories, attached garage, full basement. The kind of house that feels safe because you grew up feeling safe in it. I knew every sound it made. The way the furnace kicked on with a low thud. The way the back screen door never latched right and would tap in the wind. The 3rd stair from the top that groaned no matter how carefully you stepped on it. It was a Wednesday in late November, around 8:15 in the evening. The temperature had dropped hard that day, one of those early winter drops that catches you off guard, and there was a wind coming off the open fields to the west that pressed against the windows in long, low pulses. I had the heat up to 70. The living room was lit and warm. I was on the couch with a bowl of pasta and a show I'd already seen twice, which is the kind of TV you watch when you want noise without having to pay attention. My parents' dog had died earlier that year, so there wasn't even that. No nails on the kitchen tile. No tags jingling. Just the house and the wind and the television. I wasn't thinking about anything specific. Just existing. That was the whole plan for the week. Just exist somewhere familiar until I felt like myself again. I was halfway through my pasta when I heard something from the basement. A single metallic sound, like a pipe being tapped once with something hard. One clean ring, then silence. I looked at the basement door, the one off the kitchen, just visible from where I was sitting. It was closed. It's always closed. My dad keeps his workbench down there, and the door has a habit of swinging open if you don't pull it all the way. I told myself it was the pipes. The heat had just come on. When old plumbing heats up fast, it makes noise, expansion, pressure, whatever. My dad had complained about it for years. That sound was practically a household fixture. Except, and I kept turning this over, it hadn't sounded like a pipe adjusting. It had sounded directed, like something had deliberately struck a single surface, and then stopped. Pipes don't do one tap and go quiet. They pop and hiss and settle in a sequence. This was one sound isolated and then nothing. I put it in the pipe category anyway. I turned the TV up one notch. I finished my pasta. I didn't go check. I grew up in that house. I knew the basement. I'd been down there 1,000 times. I told myself that was reason enough not to go. About 40 minutes later, I went to the kitchen to rinse my bowl. I was standing at the sink when I noticed the back door. The back door was unlocked. Not open, just unlocked. The deadbolt was horizontal. I stared at it for a second. I was certain I'd locked it when I got home that afternoon. I lock it every time. It's habit. I'd grown up being told by my dad to lock that door every single time, and I had every single time for 25 years. I locked it, checked it twice, told myself I'd been distracted when I came in. That grief makes you automatic, that I'd just forgotten. It was a reasonable explanation. I mostly believed it. I went back to the living room. I don't know how much time passed before I noticed the television's sound had changed. Not the volume, the sound. It was coming from the wrong direction. Like something was subtly off about the acoustics in the room. I looked around and couldn't identify why. Nothing had moved. The layout was exactly as it always was. But the sound was landing differently. The way a room sounds different when a window is open. That slight hollowness, like something was drawing the audio out toward a space it shouldn't be reaching. I muted the TV. The house was completely silent for about 2 seconds. And then, from directly above me, from my parents' bedroom on the second floor, I heard something move. One slow step. The unmistakable weight of a footstep on hardwood. Then another. Then it stopped. I sat completely still on that couch for a long time. My phone had one bar. I watched it drop to nothing. Back up. Nothing again. I knew every sound the house made. I had cataloged them, without meaning, to over 25 years of living there. That was not the house settling. That was weight, distributed weight, moving across a floor. I stopped making explanations. There was nothing left to reach for. The basement door opened. I saw it from the couch. It swung wide and slow, and something was wrong about the air in the room immediately. Then the lights went out. All of them. Every room at once. I was on my feet. Something hit the wall near the kitchen. Loud, close, wrong. I couldn't tell what. I didn't stay to find out. The front door. I needed the front door. I hit something in the dark with my knee and went sideways. My shoulder caught the wall. I found the door handle. The deadbolt. My hands weren't working right. It turned. Cold air. I was outside, down the porch steps. The cold hit me like a wall, and I kept moving. Across the front lawn. Onto the sidewalk. I didn't look back. I ran to the neighbor's house 2 doors down. The Kellermans, who I'd known since I was 8 years old, and I stood on their porch, and I knocked until the light came on. I stood in their doorway, barefoot, no jacket, no phone, shaking so hard I couldn't form a sentence. Mr. Kellerman looked at my face and didn't ask any questions. He just stepped aside and let me in. The police did a walkthrough that night. They found the back window in the laundry room unlocked, one I hadn't checked. They found a shelf knocked over in the basement. They found nothing else. No sign of forced entry. No explanation for the power going out, which came back on within the hour. The officer said it was probably kids. Probably nothing. He said it in the tone people use when they want to move on. I never spent another night in that house. My parents didn't push me on it. I think my face that night told them something that words couldn't. I'm not 25 anymore. I've moved 3 times since then. Every place I've lived, I check the basement door before I sit down, even when there is no basement, especially when there is no basement. Whatever was in that house that night, it had been patient. That's what I keep coming back to, patient and quiet and already inside. This was 7 years ago. When I was 20, I was in my sophomore year at college. But it was winter break, and I decided to stay back at the house instead of flying home to my family in Arizona. Money was tight, the flight was expensive, and honestly, I just needed the stillness. My roommates had all gone home. I had the whole house to myself for 11 days, and I remember thinking that sounded perfect. I don't do well with empty houses anymore. I haven't since that December. We were renting a house just off Bardstown Road in Louisville, Kentucky, one of those old 2-story craftsman-style homes that the university neighborhood is full of. Built sometime in the 1940s, our landlord had told us, like that was something to be proud of. Deep front porch, creaky wooden floors throughout, a detached garage in the back that none of us ever used, and a heating system that ran through old cast-iron radiators in every room. The kind of house that has personality. People always said what they meant was it made noises. It was a Thursday, December 19th, about 9 in the evening. The temperature had fallen to the low 20s, and there was a dry wind coming to the gaps around the old window frames. Not a draft exactly, more like the house was breathing in through its seams. I had the radiators going, which meant a low metallic ticking that moved from room to room as the heat traveled through the pipes. I'd gotten used to it after 3 months. Background noise, the kind of thing you stop hearing. I was at the kitchen table with my laptop, working on nothing important, when my last roommate, Marcus, threw his bag in the trunk of his girlfriend's car and pulled out of the driveway. I watched the headlights sweep across the kitchen wall and disappear. After that, the street outside went quiet. The neighborhood empties out fast when the students leave. By that point, most of the houses nearby were dark. I wasn't worried. I was 20. The idea of being alone in a house for almost 2 weeks felt like luxury. It was maybe an hour after Marcus left when I heard the scratching. It came from inside the wall, the one behind the stove, which backed up against the pantry, and then the exterior of the house. A dry, deliberate scratching, not random. It had a rhythm to it, almost 3 or 4 seconds of scratching, then a pause, then again. I told myself it was a squirrel. Louisville has a lot of squirrels, and old houses have gaps in the soffits and eaves, and it was cold outside. An animal had probably found its way into the wall cavity to get warm. That happens. It's a normal thing that happens to old houses. Except squirrels don't scratch in the dark. They're not nocturnal. It was past 10 by then. And the sound wasn't frantic or exploratory the way you'd expect from an animal that had gotten trapped somewhere. It was measured, like something that knew exactly where it was and was doing what it intended to do. I turned the kitchen light on brighter. The scratching stopped. I stood there in the kitchen for a moment. Then I told myself, animal, cold wall cavity, done. I went back to my laptop. I turned my music up just slightly without acknowledging to myself that that's what I was doing. The scratching didn't come back that night. I told myself that was confirmation. The next evening I came downstairs around 8 and found the back door standing open. Not wide open, maybe 6 inches. The cold was pouring through it. I stood in the kitchen doorway staring at it for a long moment. I had not used the back door that day. I hadn't used it in 2 days. There was no reason to. The garage was empty and the backyard was dead and frozen. I always kept it locked. My landlord had specifically told us to keep it locked because the latch was loose and it didn't hold reliably if it wasn't deadbolt. I checked my memory, replayed the last 48 hours. I could not account for it being open. I deadbolted, checked it, pulled on it twice. I went through the rest of the house and checked every window on the ground floor. Everything else was closed. I told myself the latch had finally given out on its own. Wind pressure, old hardware, it happens. I believed about 60% of that. I pushed a chair against the back door that night, under the handle. I told myself it was just practical, a broken latch. It was the third night when I woke up at 2 a.m. to complete silence. That sounds like nothing, but the radiators run all night. That constant low ticking, metal expanding in sequence as heat moves through the pipes. It had been my white noise for 3 months. I'd stopped consciously registering it, and then it was gone, and the silence it left behind was so total and so wrong that I sat up in bed before I was fully awake. I lay there and listened. The house was dead quiet. No radiators. No wind in the windows. No sound from outside. Like the whole building had been lowered into a container and sealed. And then, from directly below my bedroom, from the kitchen, 1 floor down, I heard footsteps. Slow, even, moving from the back of the kitchen toward the hallway, then stopping. I knew those floors. I had walked them hundreds of times. I knew the exact sound of weight on that hardwood, the way it popped differently near the stove than it did near the door. What I heard was correct for that floor. Correct weight, correct position. Moving through my kitchen at 2 a.m. My phone had no signal. I watched it try to find a bar and fail. I sat in the dark of my bed and did not move and stopped constructing explanations because there were none left that I could make myself believe. Something hit the bedroom door from the other side. Not a knock. Impact. The door shook in its frame. Then again. Harder. I was out of the bed. The door. I needed the door to stay closed. I hit the light switch. Nothing. Power out. Black. Something scraped along the wall outside in the hallway. Close. Moving. I went for the window. 2nd floor. I didn't think. I just went. Pushed the screen out. Cold air. The porch roof was right there below me. I dropped onto it. My feet went out from under me on the ice. I slid, caught the edge with both hands, hung for a second, let go, landed in the bushes below, rolled onto the frozen yard. I got up. I ran around the side of the house, out the gate, onto the sidewalk, down Bardstown Road toward the lights. A gas station 2 blocks down, open, fluorescent and loud and full of light. I pushed through the door and stood there in the brightness, barefoot on the tile of my sleep clothes, and the guy behind the counter looked at me and said nothing for a second. I leaned on the counter. I couldn't speak. He handed me the store phone without being asked. The police found no one in the house. No signs of forced entry, though they noted the back door latch was faulty. The power outage was real. A transformer on the block had blown sometime after midnight. They had an explanation for every individual thing. They were patient about it. Thorough, even, but they couldn't explain the footsteps. And they didn't try to. I flew home to Arizona the next morning. I didn't go back to that house. Marcus picked up my things in January. I didn't ask him what the place felt like when he walked in. I finished my degree, got an apartment after graduation, ground floor, 1 bedroom, and I know every sound it makes at every hour of the day. I've made sure of that. I don't know what was in that house. I've made my peace with not knowing. What I haven't made peace with is this. Whatever it was, it had already been inside before I locked the door.